He signed a marriage contract to protect his fortune, his name, his empire. But instead, he married the wrong sister. Millionaire married the wrong sister but found the right love. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. If you love cinematic stories about love, redemption, and class differences, please subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a premiere. Where are you watching from today? Tell me in the comments, I always read them. All right, lights down. Let's begin. Let us return to our main character. The sound of church bells echoed through the marble hall as flashes from cameras burst like lightning. Ethan Hale stood motionless at the altar, his jaw tight, his eyes hidden behind calm confidence. Every lens in the room waited for his next move. The billionaire CEO who had built an empire before turning 35 was about to seal a marriage that was supposed to be perfect. Supposed to be. Across the aisle, the bride trembled beneath her veil. Her name was Lila Blake, though the world believed she was her sister, Sophia. The real fiancé had vanished the night before, leaving chaos and disgrace behind. Lila was the quiet one, the art teacher who had spent her life keeping others' dreams alive while her own collapsed under medical bills and rent overdue notices. When her mother's hospital called that morning demanding another deposit, Lila's heart broke. Sophia had begged her, "Just 1 week. Please, Lila. I promise no one will ever know." Now the weight of that lie pressed harder than the diamond ring sliding onto her finger. Ethan's hand was steady as he repeated the vows, his voice deep, measured, and unknowingly binding himself to the wrong woman. Lila whispered her answers, her pulse racing. The pen trembled as she signed the paper that turned deception into law. The flash of ink felt colder than ice. As the crowd erupted into applause, Lila forced a smile for the cameras. Ethan leaned in close enough for her to smell his cologne, clean cedar, and faint smoke. "Relax," he murmured, eyes forward. "We only have to convince them for a while." His tone was professional, detached, like a deal closing. She nodded, pretending to breathe normally, pretending she was not a fraud standing beside a man who could buy entire cities. When the limousine door shut, silence swallowed the noise of celebration. The city lights of New York shimmered outside like distant galaxies. Lila's reflection stared back at her through the tinted glass veil, slightly crooked, lipstick fading, eyes filled with fear. Ethan loosened his tie, still scrolling through messages on his phone. To him, this was a merger. To her, it was a debt she could never repay. "Thank you for not running," he said finally, glancing at her. "I should have," she whispered. "But my family needed this." He studied her for a long moment, as if sensing the fracture in her voice, then looked away. "This is business, Miss Blake. Keep that in mind." Her name on his tongue felt like a warning. The limousine stopped before Hale Tower, a glass monument piercing the skyline. Inside, marble floors reflected chandeliers like frozen fire. The staff greeted them with practiced smiles. Cameras followed. Ethan placed a hand on her back, not affection, but choreography, and guided her through the grand lobby as flashes erupted again. By the time the doors to their penthouse closed, the applause and music were gone. Only the faint hum of the city filled the silence. Lila removed her veil, exhaling shakily. Ethan poured himself a drink, his reflection sharp in the glass window. "There are 3 rules," he said without turning. 1. We keep appearances. 2. We stay out of each other's way. 3. When this ends, you walk away clean. She met his eyes in the glass. "And if I break a rule?" He took a slow sip. "Then the deal ends, and so does the protection that comes with it." Outside, lightning cracked over the skyline. Lila turned toward the window, watching the rain blur the city into streaks of silver. Beneath the thunder, one thought echoed through her chest. She had married the wrong man for the right reason, yet somehow it already felt like fate was rewriting the rules. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Hale Tower, painting the white marble floors with gold. Lila had barely slept. The bed was too soft, the silence too heavy, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of the wedding cameras. She rose quietly, folding the borrowed silk robe tighter around her frame. From the balcony, New York stretched below glass towers, endless traffic, the hum of a life that did not belong to her. Downstairs, the scent of roasted coffee filled the penthouse kitchen. Ethan stood by the counter, reading messages on his tablet, a perfect image of control. He glanced up only once. "Morning," he said, his tone neutral. "Good morning," she replied, voice small. He gestured toward the dining table, where 2 plates waited croissants, berries, eggs prepared with mathematical precision. Lila sat gingerly, unsure if she was allowed to eat before him. "You do not need to act like a guest," he said, without looking. "For the next few weeks, this is your home, at least on paper." "Paper," she repeated softly, cutting into the food that suddenly tasted like guilt. After breakfast, Ethan handed her a folder. Inside was a detailed schedule, charity galas, board meetings, dinners. "These are the appearances we need to make together," he explained. "Every photo, every handshake keeps investors calm. We are a symbol, not a story." Lila nodded, tracing the ink lines that mapped a life not her own. "I understand. You follow the plan, and this will end clean. You deviate, and both our names fall apart." Later that day, a black car carried them to the Hale Foundation office for their first public meeting. Lila's reflection in the window showed a woman in designer clothes she could never afford, hair pinned in perfect waves by a stylist she had barely spoken to. Ethan sat beside her, silent, scrolling through financial reports as if the world outside did not exist. The gap between them in the back seat felt wider than the city itself. At the lobby, the camera flashes returned. "Smile," Ethan murmured, offering his arm. She did, though it trembled. Inside the elevator, she exhaled, whispering under her breath, "I am not her." Ethan heard it. "You are whoever they need you to be today," he said quietly. His voice was not cruel, just tired. Hours passed in a blur of handshakes and polite laughter. Lila's cheeks ached from smiling. The staff adored her kindness. She asked names, remembered faces, thanked people sincerely. When Ethan noticed, something in his expression softened, but he said nothing. That evening, back in the penthouse, Lila kicked off her heels and stared out at the skyline again. She missed the smell of acrylic paint, the laughter of her students, the feeling of being useful. The city below felt like a movie she was trapped inside. Ethan entered, loosening his tie. "You handled today well." "Did I?" she asked, surprised. He nodded slightly. "Most people freeze in front of those reporters. You did not." "I guess teachers get used to being watched," she said, half smiling. For the first time, he almost smiled back. The tension shifted just a breath, but enough to make her heart stumble. Then, his phone buzzed. A name flashed across the screen, Sophia Blake. Lila's stomach tightened. He turned away quickly, voice low. "Not now." When the call ended, he found her gaze fixed on the floor. "She called?" Lila asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It was business," he replied too fast. "Do not read into it." "I am not," she said, though the lie burned. Rain began to tap against the glass, the sky, folding into gray. Ethan poured himself another drink, eyes lost somewhere in the city. "This arrangement works because it has boundaries. Remember that." "I remember," she said, clutching the robe tighter around her. "But sometimes boundaries feel like cages." He said nothing. The sound of rain filled the silence. When she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Lila," he said quietly, "you did well today." She paused, surprised by the softness. "Thank you." In the reflection of the window, their eyes met for a second. 2 strangers bound by paper and lies, standing in the same room but living in separate worlds. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan. Inside, something unspoken began to shift, fragile but undeniable. 3 days later, the city shimmered beneath a thin veil of rain. Lila stood in front of a mirror inside the penthouse guest room, struggling to fasten the clasp of a diamond necklace loaned by Ethan's PR team. She barely recognized herself, the satin gown, the perfect curls, the faint rose color on her lips. Tonight was the Hale Foundation Gala, their first major public test as a married couple. she whispered to her reflection. Just smile, Lila. Smile, and do not let them see through you. When she stepped into the living room, Ethan was waiting in a tailored black tuxedo. His eyes flicked up from his watch and stayed on her for a heartbeat longer than expected. You clean up well, he said, voice even but softer than usual. Thank you, she murmured, glancing away. He extended his arm. Let us get through tonight, Mrs. Hale. The ballroom glowed with crystal light, filled with donors, executives, and whispers that smelled of champagne and money. The orchestra played slow jazz. Every time Lila smiled, she felt the weight of deception behind her teeth. Reporters surrounded them as soon as they entered. Mr. Hale, how does married life feel? One shouted. Ethan replied smoothly, productive. And Mrs. Hale, is it true you met through a corporate introduction? Another asked. Lila nodded, choosing her words carefully. Yes. Sometimes the right partnerships begin where business ends. The crowd laughed politely. Ethan's hand pressed lightly at her back, a signal to keep moving. They greeted board members, toasted investors, and posed for photos beneath the Hale Dynamics banner. Lila tried to breathe through the glittering chaos, but one voice from behind froze her. Mrs. Hale, is it true you used to be a teacher? A woman in a sequined gown asked with a smirk. How adorable! A ripple of laughter followed. Lila's throat tightened. She could lie, or she could stand tall. Yes, she said clearly. I taught art. I taught children to see beauty in broken things. It is funny, but I learned a lot about people doing that. The room fell quiet for a moment. Then someone clapped, and another followed. Within seconds, the laughter turned into applause. Ethan looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time since the wedding. His eyes were no longer cold. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city, Ethan handed her a glass of sparkling water. You handled that well. I told the truth, she replied. That was brave, or foolish. Maybe both, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The wind carried the distant hum of traffic below. For the first time, the silence between them did not feel hostile. Lila leaned against the railing, her dress brushing his sleeve. Why do you do this? She asked softly. The parties, the cameras, the perfect act. Ethan took a long breath before answering. Because people like me do not get to make mistakes in public. Every gesture is calculated, every word is recorded. After a while, you forget what is real. She turned to him. Then what do you see when you look at me? His jaw tightened, as if he wanted to answer but could not. A reminder that honesty still exists, he said finally. A flash from the ballroom caught their eyes, reporters signaling for another photo. Ethan straightened, offering his hand. Ready for the next round? Do I have a choice? She said with a small laugh. Not tonight. He held the door open for her, and for a brief moment, their fingers brushed. The touch was accidental, but it lingered. Hours later, when the last guest had gone, the penthouse lights dimmed. Lila slipped off her heels, exhaustion softening her movements. Ethan loosened his tie, still in his tuxedo, standing by the window. You were extraordinary tonight, he said quietly. I was terrified. You did not show it. He poured her a glass of water and handed it over. Their hands met again, warm against cool glass. Maybe you should let people see more of who you are, he said. She looked up, surprised. Would that help your company? No, he said, meeting her gaze. It might help me remember who I am. The city lights shimmered across the window, painting gold lines on their faces. Neither spoke again. Outside, the night stretched endless and uncertain. Inside, something wordless began to grow too fragile to name, too real to ignore. The following week passed in a blur of events and controlled smiles. Every morning began with Lila practicing answers to scripted questions. Every night ended with her washing off the mask of perfection that had become her new skin. Yet somewhere between the forced interviews and the flashing cameras, she started noticing the small cracks in Ethan's armor. He stayed up late, pacing the study, reading old letters he never explained. He carried an ache behind his calm, and for reasons she could not name, she wanted to understand it. One evening, after a long charity dinner, the elevator doors opened to the penthouse, and the silence felt heavier than usual. Lila kicked off her shoes and dropped the silver clutch on the counter. The city outside shimmered with soft rain. Ethan stood by the window, his tie undone, the reflection of lightning crawling across the glass. "Long day?" she asked. "Every day is long," he said without looking back. "You did well tonight. The board is pleased." She laughed softly. "You sound surprised. I am learning not to underestimate you." Lila hesitated before stepping closer. "May I ask you something?" He turned, one eyebrow raised. "Do you ever regret it? This deal? This marriage?" Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment. "Regret is expensive. I try not to afford it." "That sounds lonely." "It is manageable." The honesty in his tone startled her. For the first time, he seemed human, not the billionaire behind the headlines, but a man standing on the same fragile ground as her. "Come on," he said suddenly, picking up his glass. "There is something I want to show you." They took the private elevator down to the lower floors of Hale Tower. When the doors opened, Lila found herself in a quiet gallery space, empty walls, soft lights, a single easel in the center. "What is this?" she whispered. "My mother's studio," he said. "She used to paint. After she passed, I kept this room exactly as it was." Lila looked around, eyes wide. "It is beautiful. She always said art is the only truth you cannot disguise." His voice softened. "When I heard you taught art, I almost canceled the wedding. It felt too close." She frowned. "Close to what?" "To something real." The air between them shifted. Lila reached out to touch one of the unfinished canvases, a splash of blue and silver frozen mid-stroke. "You should finish it," she said. "I do not paint," he replied. "Then maybe it is time you start." For a long moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by ghosts of color and memory. Then Ethan turned to her. "You remind me of her, the way you see people." Lila smiled faintly. "I see what people try to hide." Outside, thunder rolled across the city again, echoing the pulse of something neither of them could name. Later that night, back in the penthouse, the rain had stopped. Lila stepped onto the rooftop terrace, the skyline glittering like a field of stars. Ethan joined her, two glasses in hand. "You know," he said quietly, "when this all started, I thought it would be simple. A contract, a few public appearances, and we would both walk away richer. And now?" she asked. "Now I am not sure what this is anymore." The wind tugged at her hair, the city humming below. "Ethan," she said softly, "we cannot keep pretending forever." He set his glass down. "I know, but pretending has become the only thing I am good at." She turned toward him. "Then maybe let us stop." For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The distance between them disappeared as he stepped closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "If I stop pretending, I might not want to let you go." "Then do not," she whispered back. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Their eyes met, and the moment hung fragile and electric. But before anything more could happen, the rooftop door burst open. Claire, Ethan's assistant, stood breathless. "Sir, I am sorry," she said quickly. "You need to see this. It is urgent." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What is it?" "It is your wife's sister," she said. "Sophia Blake just returned to New York." The air turned cold. Lila felt her heart drop as Ethan's expression hardened, the warmth between them fading like light at dawn. The lie that had built their fragile world was about to collapse, and both of them knew it. Ethan stared at the assistant, the sound of the rain and the city falling away into silence. "Sophia Blake just returned to New York," Claire repeated, her voice hesitant. Lila froze. The name hit the air like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, no one moved. "Thank you, Claire," Ethan said tightly. "You can go." The door closed, leaving the two of them alone beneath the night sky. Lila's hands trembled. "She is back?" Ethan nodded once, eyes fixed on the skyline. "Apparently, yes. Are you going to see her?" The words came out smaller than she intended. He turned toward her, expression unreadable. "I will have to. She is part of the deal that started all of this." Lila's chest tightened. "And what am I then? A replacement until the original returns?" "That is not fair," he said quietly. "Neither is any of this." she whispered. She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist. Lila, please, whatever happens next, I did not plan for this to go this far. Her voice cracked. You mean you did not plan to care? He let go of her hand slowly. Maybe that is exactly what I mean. The following morning, the tension lingered in the penthouse, like a storm that refused to pass. Ethan left early for meetings, while Lila stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection in the pale morning light. The woman staring back was not the same teacher who had stepped into this mansion weeks ago. She was dressed in silk, but beneath the polish was fear that truth was finally coming for her. By noon, gossip had already begun. Sophia Blake spotted at JFK. Runaway bride returns to reclaim her throne. News anchors replayed footage from the wedding, slow-motion shots of Ethan's solemn face beside the veiled bride who was not Sophia. The secret Lila had carried was becoming a ticking bomb. That evening, the doorbell rang. Lila opened it to find Sophia herself, elegant, flawless, and furious. Hello, sister, Sophia said, her smile sharp. You wear my ring well. Lila's voice faltered. Sophia, I can explain. Oh, I am sure. You can. But I would rather let the press hear it first. Ethan appeared behind Lila, calm but pale. Sophia, let us talk privately. There is nothing private left, Ethan, she snapped. You married the wrong Blake, and the world deserves to know. Sophia's heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked out, leaving the faint scent of expensive perfume and vengeance. The silence that followed was unbearable. Lila pressed her palms to her temples. She will ruin you. Ethan shook his head. She will ruin us. He paced the room, pulling at his tie. Damage control starts tomorrow. I will handle the press conference. You should not be there. I cannot hide anymore, Lila said firmly. If this comes out, I will tell them the truth myself. You do not owe them your honesty, he said. You owe it to yourself to survive this. Her eyes glistened. Surviving is not the same as living, Ethan. That night, neither of them slept. Lila sat by the window, watching the city pulse with restless light. The rain had stopped, but thunder still echoed in the distance. She thought of every lie that had built this fragile world, the signatures, the photo ops, the smiles that had fooled everyone but her own heart. When dawn came, she found Ethan in the study, staring at the contract that had started everything. His hands were on the paper, but he was not reading it. He looked up when she entered. She will hold a press conference at noon, he said. The reporters will tear us apart. Then let them, Lila replied. Maybe the truth deserves a stage. He exhaled slowly, the first sign of defeat in his voice. If we go down together. No, she said softly. You built an empire. I built a lie. Let me take the fall. Ethan shook his head, stepping closer. You do not understand, Lila. Without you, none of this means anything. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting light across the ruined perfection of their penthouse. The truth was coming, unstoppable and bright. And somewhere inside that storm, love was still trying to find its voice. If this fake marriage universe pulls you in, subscribe now so you never miss the next chapter. The morning of the press conference arrived heavy and gray, like the city itself knew what was about to collapse. Lila stood in front of the tall mirror, buttoning the simple black dress she had chosen. It was not glamorous, not meant for cameras. It was the only thing she owned that felt honest. Behind her, the news played softly on the television. Sophia Blake will appear today at noon, revealing shocking details about the Hale marriage, the anchor announced. Downstairs, Ethan waited by the window, his tie undone, his posture tense. The man who once controlled boardrooms and markets now looked like someone fighting to control his own heartbeat. When Lila entered, he turned. You do not have to come, he said. I do, she answered quietly. If the truth breaks, I want to stand when it happens. They rode to the Hale Foundation headquarters in silence. Outside the building, a storm of flashing lights and microphones waited. Security guards held reporters behind barricades. Ethan stepped out first, cameras firing like gunshots. Lila followed, keeping her head high. Inside the glass atrium, the conference room glowed under white lights. Sophia was already there, surrounded by journalists. She looked perfect, every hair in place, her confidence restored. When her eyes met Lila's, the smirk returned. "Nice of you to show up, sister," she said under her breath. Ethan moved to the podium. His voice carried across the room, firm and deliberate. "Before rumors grow further, I will clarify everything." The reporters leaned forward, pens ready. "It is true," he continued, "that on the day of the wedding, the wrong sister walked down the aisle. But it is also true that I knew something was off and I chose not to stop it." A murmur spread through the crowd. Sophia's smile faltered. "What are you doing?" she hissed. Ethan ignored her. "The woman I married that day, Lila Blake, has shown more integrity and courage than most people in my world. What began as an arrangement became the most honest chapter of my life." Lila's breath caught. The reporters erupted with questions. Was it love? Was this planned? Ethan raised his hand for silence. "No contracts, no disguises can fake what is real. You all came here for scandal, but what you are seeing is truth." Sophia stood abruptly, furious. "You are destroying your reputation!" Ethan faced her calmly. "A reputation built on lies is already ruined." She turned and stormed out, flashes following her to the exit. When the crowd quieted, Ethan looked toward Lila. "Do you want to add anything?" Her throat tightened, but she stepped forward. "Only this," she said softly. "I never wanted to deceive anyone. I only wanted to protect my family. But somewhere in that lie, I found a reason to believe again. Maybe that is what love really is, something true that survives the wrong beginning." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked softly, no longer as weapons but as witnesses. Ethan reached for her hand in full view of everyone. "No more pretending," he said. She squeezed his hand back. "No more lies." The conference ended, but outside the storm had begun to clear. Reporters shouted as they left the building, but Ethan and Lila ignored them. They walked straight through the flashing lights, hand in hand. By evening, headlines flooded every screen. "Billionaire admits marriage was real after all. Wrong bride, right love." In the penthouse, later that night, the air felt lighter. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee instead of champagne. "We might have just lost half the board," he said with a weary smile. Lila sat across from him, smiling softly. "Then we will build something better with the other half." He studied her for a long moment. "You would stay even after all of this?" "I never wanted your empire," she said. "I wanted your truth." Ethan's eyes softened. He reached across the table, brushing her hand gently. "You already have it." Outside, New York glowed under the fading rain, the streets alive again. For the first time since the contract was signed, the penthouse did not feel like a cage. It felt like home. The following days were quieter, but the calm was fragile, like glass waiting to shatter. The truth had been spoken, yet consequences were only beginning to unfold. News channels dissected every moment of the conference. Some called Ethan reckless. Others called Lila a liar who had stolen her sister's life. The board of Hale Dynamics demanded an emergency meeting. Ethan faced the storm head-on. He spent long hours in the office, defending his decisions, trying to keep the company steady. Lila stayed in the penthouse, painting again for the first time in weeks. The strokes were uncertain at first, but soon color began to return to her world, soft gold, pale blue, the shade of peace she had almost forgotten. One evening, Ethan came home later than usual, exhaustion drawn across his face. He loosened his tie and found her standing by the easel, brush in hand. "You are painting," he said quietly. "I had to do something that felt real again." He walked closer, studying the canvas. It was not a portrait or a skyline. It was an abstract burst of light and shadow chaos melting into calm. "It is beautiful," he said. "It is unfinished," she replied. "Like us." He smiled faintly. "The board has voted. They are cutting me out of the company." Lila turned, startled. "Ethan, it is all right. I saw it coming. I would rather lose everything built on a lie than keep it by pretending." She sat down. "The brush. Then what will you do?" "Start again," he said simply. "Maybe build something smaller, something that matters." Lila looked at him for a long moment. "You already did. You built trust." He stepped closer, the space between them warm and quiet. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" She shook her head. "No. Even if it began as a mistake, it taught me the truth about love. It is never about contracts or names. It is about choosing to stay when everything else falls apart." Ethan exhaled, his eyes softening. "Then stay," he said. "I am already here," she whispered. Outside, the rain began again, gentle this time, like a promise rather than a warning. In the reflection of the window, their figures stood side by side, two people stripped of wealth, of titles, of every false beginning. What remained was something real, fragile, and bright. A week later, the once silent penthouse began to feel different. The newspapers had moved on to newer scandals, and the city that once judged them now barely remembered their names. Ethan spent his mornings searching for new office space, while Lila continued to paint, her canvases scattered across the sunlit living room. For the first time, their lives were not ruled by headlines or contracts. One afternoon, Ethan found her asleep on the couch, a half-finished canvas resting beside her. It showed the outline of two hands reaching toward each other, one covered in gold paint, the other in blue. He smiled quietly and set down a small envelope on the coffee table. When she woke, sunlight spilling across her face, she saw his handwriting on the front, "For the woman who made honesty beautiful again." Inside was a folded document. For a moment, her stomach turned another contract, but when she opened it, her breath caught. It was the same marriage contract they had both signed weeks ago, now streaked with a red line, and Ethan's signature scrawled across the bottom in bold ink, "Nullified." She looked up, eyes wide. "What is this?" He met her gaze, calm and certain. "The end of what started as a deal." He reached for a small lighter, flicking the flame alive. "And the beginning of something real." Lila's hand trembled as he held the paper out to her. Together, they set it on fire. The flame curled the edges, turning the legal words into smoke, the air filled with the faint scent of burning ink and liberation. She watched until the last ember faded, tears shining but not from sorrow. Ethan took her hand, his thumb brushing the back of her fingers. "No more rules, no more pretending. Then what are we now?" she asked softly. "Whatever we choose to be," he said, "but I would like to start with truth." He reached into his pocket again and revealed a small velvet box. Inside lay a simple gold ring, no diamonds, no symbolism of wealth, only sincerity. "This time, no photographers, no contracts, no conditions. Just me asking if you will stay." Lila covered her mouth, emotion flooding her eyes. "I thought you said you were done with deals." "This is not a deal," he said with a smile. "It is a promise." She nodded, tears finally spilling. "Then yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and for the first time, it felt right, no pretense, no fear, just two hearts that had finally stopped running from themselves. Outside, the sunset painted the city in gold and rose. The same skyline that once judged them now watched quietly as smoke from the burned contract drifted into the evening air. What was once fake had turned real, and what was once broken had begun to heal. The following month, the rooftop that once carried the weight of secrets became the stage for something new. The air was warm, and the city lights below flickered like scattered stars. Ethan stood at the edge of the terrace, straightening his tie not out of habit, but out of nerves. Behind him, soft music played, the kind that wrapped around the heart instead of the ears. Lila stepped out in a simple ivory dress, the hem brushing against the floor. Her hair moved gently in the evening breeze. There were no cameras, no reporters, no signatures waiting to be made. Only a handful of people stood nearby, employees who had become friends, the housekeeper who had once taught Lila how to fold napkins, and Dr. Harris from the Hale Foundation, who smiled proudly from the corner. Ethan took her hands, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "The first time I saw you, I thought you were a mistake. I could correct. But you became the one truth I never want to lose." Lila's eyes shimmered as she replied, "You married the wrong sister, Ethan Hale. But you found the right love." He smiled, sliding a new ring onto her finger, this one engraved with a simple phrase, "No more pretending." The small crowd clapped softly. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks bloomed over the river, their reflection painting gold across the city skyline. After the vows, Ethan led her to the edge of the rooftop. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that day had gone as planned?" he asked. She laughed lightly. "You would be married to the wrong woman, and I would still be dreaming of a life that was never mine." He nodded. "Then I am grateful for every mistake that brought me here." They stood together, looking over the city that had once judged them and now quietly celebrated them. Lila leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering, "It feels different now." Ethan smiled. "It feels real." As the night deepened, they walked hand in hand through the rooftop garden. The air smelled of roses and rain. Behind them, the old contract's ashes rested inside a small glass jar on the table, a reminder of everything they had overcome. Ethan stopped and turned toward her one last time. "Lila, we started with rules and lies, but we are ending with truth and choice. That is all I ever wanted." She looked up at him, her smile soft. "Then let us keep choosing each other every day." The camera of life would fade here, not with a flash or a scandal, but with two people who had finally learned that love was never about perfection. It was about grace, forgiveness, and the courage to start again. If you want more Untold Billionaire love, subscribe and choose your next chapter on screen.